Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you have your umbrellas at the ready, because tonight we have some scary stories in the rain. So without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story I am about to share with you is very difficult for me. It has never been told in its entirety. Although I have shared bits and pieces with certain people, I am going to share this with all of you today. I guess I should start at the beginning. That's usually a good place. I'm a female, and am now the tender age of 32. I am adopted. There were 6 kids born to my birth mother, Jane. I know very little about my oldest siblings, other than what I was told by family and friends of the family. The first was taken at a young age, possibly birth, and adopted due to Jane's inability to care for her. I do not know who the father was. We did meet her once, about 17 years ago. Jane served time in prison after neglecting the next 2 so badly that they died. She was convicted of manslaughter. I don't know how many years she was in for, but after, she met my father Dale once she was out, who was at least 10 years younger than her. She was apparently still married to her first husband when I was born, and his name was on my birth certificate, even though he was never legally considered my father. My brother Eugene was born nearly 2 years later. Obviously, social services were watching her very closely. It didn't take them long to realize she hadn't magically acquired a mother's instinct whilst in prison. I don't know what Dale was thinking getting involved with her, but I do know that he cared about us and loved us deeply. He struggled to provide for us, while Jane stayed at home and did whatever she did. We were often left in our own filth and given very little or nothing to eat. When Jane visited family and friends, we were handed off to them to be changed, cleaned, and fed, like she expected everyone but her to care for her children. It wasn't before long that social services removed us from the home. This happened multiple times, only to return us because Dale promised them that he would make everything work. At some point during this whole ordeal, Jane hooked up with John, who she says was Dale's best friend. I was very young at the time, so all that I remember is a man coming over while Dale was away, and there was a sense of wrongness to him. Eugene remembers even less, more a negative air to the place we used to live. I also remember John had an insect tattoo on a visible part of his body, and to this day I hate that insect as a tattoo. Somehow it was discovered that she was with John. I don't know what Dale's reaction was to it. I do know that social services immediately put their foot down and said she could not have him around her children. Apparently, he had a reputation with children and could not be trusted. Instead of kicking her lover out, Jane left with him and moved across the country. While I am lucky enough not to remember anything, I showed signs of having been severely molested as a child. I won't go into details here, other than to say it's very likely that Jane was aware, and even more likely that John was the culprit. With no one to care for his children, and not making enough to afford childcare, Dane struggled for a while, before deciding to give us to a family he knew as good people, before the state could split us up. Jane had already lost custody and parental rights, so Dale signed everything he could. Jane was still legally our mother, so he was unable to adopt us out. And over to the couple we went, when we were the ages of 5 and 3, trusting that we would be in good hands. He stayed in touch and sent gifts, visiting on the rare occasion he could afford to travel. When my parents were in the area, they made sure he knew so that he could see us. We hadn't heard from Jane in a while, when all of a sudden, shortly before my 8th birthday, she showed up one day at my new home. There were no legal restrictions about her seeing me, but my parents were on guard. This grew on a massive scale when she announced that her and John, who she was now married to and pregnant by, were moving into the area. This triggered the scariest period of my childhood. They began to try and separate Eugene and me from our parents. In their minds, if we went with our parents, we would be returned to Jane. Never mind that she had already been proven unfit in their eyes. But she thought it was a foolproof plan. Initially, they began to spread rumors of abuse and mishandling. They called social services and made false claims. They lied to friends of the family. And when this didn't work, they started actively trying to kidnap us. My parents were upfront with us about what was going on. They believed that if we knew the truth, we could better protect ourselves. We were always with a member of the family. They let Jane see us, but never alone. Someone was always in the same room. My family was told by people who were familiar with Jane that they wanted us for the welfare check. For my 8th birthday, John walked up to my father and stated that he and Jane were going to be taking Eugene and me out for ice cream. My father refused, saying that they always made birthdays a family affair, and that John and Jane were welcome to come over and join us. John later told a friend of our family's that he was so angry if Eugene and I had not been standing there watching, he would have punched my father. After this, I believe they started watching the house, waiting for my parents to leave. I think they knew that my parents sometimes allowed an older sibling to sit us, and that they could overpower a young teenager. We lived in a very safe rural area, where we didn't have any close neighbors. The mentality was that every homeowner owned guns and handled issues themselves. I remember hiding in one of the bedrooms with Eugene while they walked around the side of the house, hammering on the doors and windows. Our older foster brother looked at us with a rifle cocked across his arms and told us, "I know she's your mum, but if they come through that door, I'm shooting them." After they lost custody of their child due to neglect, they broke up and went their separate ways, leaving the state entirely. The stalking stopped, we were allowed to grow up in peace, seeing Jane only occasionally when we visited her state to see other family members. When I was 14, Jane called me crying, saying she had decided to sign the adoption papers. She had finally given up on getting us back. John's grandmother got custody of their child, Ryan. She did right by him, but when he was 11 and I was 19, he was killed in a car accident. His grandma requested that I sing at his funeral. Both Jane and John were there. John was not sitting with the rest of the group, but was off to the side and had a man with him. And as we were leaving to go to the gravestone, John stood by the doorway and grabbed me on the way out. He tried to pull me into a hug, crying about how he had missed you kids. I stood there for a split second, stunned, before pulling away. At the same time I drew back. The man with him firmly grasped under his arm and pulled him back. After I got back home, it began to bother me that John was still out there. I wondered how much, if anything, had been documented about his behavior with me or other children. I looked him up online and found that he was a registered sex offender, but not for what he'd done to me. He was listed as having sexual contact with a child of under 13, as recently as 2005, 4 years after I had seen him at the funeral. Recently, I asked Dale's mother, with whom I had stayed in touch, on and off with through the years, what she knew about it. She said that she knew John and Jane had wanted to make money off me, and that's why they wanted me back. Specifically, me. All this time I had been told and believed they wanted both Eugene and me for benefit reasons. Now, I am not so sure we had the story straight. My family moved to this standard upscale suburban home after roughing it for a couple of years to save up. We also got a deal on the home because it was a model home before it was ours. Like had all the fake furniture to show off the neighborhood homes. Anyway, it had this loft area with 2 stairwells that go up to it, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from the loft since it was so open. One day, my 2 best friends, one being a guy and the other being a girl, are hanging out in the loft. We were in high school, and they were horny, and always all over each other. When I was, or wasn't in the room for that matter, we were watching TV, and I get up to go to the toilet. When I left, they were all up on each other, and when I came back, they were on different ends of the couch. I just assumed that they had gotten into a fight, so I asked what was up. "Your little sister's home," the dude says. My face turned sheep white. "What's wrong?" the girl asked. I asked them what made them think that. They said they heard her. I'm sort of freaking out at this point. "No one's here," I say. We check the house, and I'm right. Well, it turns out that before it was a model home, a family lived there and a little girl had been playing in the loft, but had climbed on the railings and fell to her death below. My 2 best friends swear to this day that they heard what they thought was my sister's laugh and her running up the stairs, hitting her hands on each step, like she was running up on all fours. I never had any encounters, other than the fact that right next to where she landed was the house's central intercom. We had an intercom system in every room that you could play music through or just talk to each other. Every so often at night, at the same time you'd wake up to the intercom button being pressed and just the blank sound of static airways, like someone was holding down the button but not speaking. My room was on the 3rd floor, and I'd have to walk down to the bottom of the main unit to turn it off there. I always thought I'd see her, but I never did. I just want to clear a few things up here. I am by no means your average girly girl, nor am I considered small. I stand at 5'4", and let's just say I have a decent amount of muscle on me. I have an athletic build, yes. Thick is my category. I thought I'd include this tidbit of info, because who the hell would have the balls to wanna follow me when there are much easier targets leaving a gym? Let's begin. I had just finished my workout after yoga, and I was walking to my car. I get in, and I notice this newer maroon F250 pull up behind me. At this point I think nothing of it. Why would I? I stay parked whilst getting my music situated. Maybe I took a selfie or two and replied to some friends on Snapchat. You know, the usual bullshit girls do before we go anywhere. Another bit of important information I might add. I come from a blue family, meaning everyone I associate with, friends and family, are all officers or higher rank. Of course, I've already got a convo going with one of my best guy friends, another officer, before I begin to pull off. Here is where shit gets weird. The truck almost immediately takes off right behind me. Doesn't even hesitate. I'm not even sure I paid attention right away to the move. I didn't quite realize it until I turn onto the main road at the light and put 2 and 2 together and realize that it's the truck that's come up behind me while parked. I got a bad feeling right away and told my friend that I was being followed. He tells me to either speed up or slow down and see if he mocks my moves. I actually get over and fall back, and this guy slows down and gets behind me. I tell my friend this, and he told me whatever I do, don't go home. I figured, well, no shit. If this guy wants to joyride, he'll get one. I turn into my neighborhood, which is huge, and from there I took so many wrong turns and made complete circles at one point, and by this time I'm getting fed up. I call a detective I know that lived a few streets down from me and quickly tell him what's going on, and thankfully he was home. He tells me to ride by his house slowly and he would pull out behind him once he sees us go by. I do it, and the detective pulls out behind him. He tells me to then exit the neighborhood. By this time I'm about to exit. The creepy truck has already begun to fall back. I go a bit down the main road again, and I realize I seem to have lost him at a light near my neighborhood exit. I call the detective to confirm I've lost him, and he tells me he went down a completely different street and ditched him once he reached the highway. I touch base back with my friend to let him know I'm fine, but hauling ass back home. I arrived safely, went straight to the gun cabinet, and the detective came over for a bit in case shit got crazy and creepy, in case the guy showed up. He tells me he ran his plates, and he didn't see any past arrests or previous history other than your average traffic violations. He radios in and tells them to be on the lookout for the creepy guy and gives the description of the truck in case anything weird possibly happens. So Arso, who thought it'd be a good idea to follow me from the gym, guess you were wrong. I am a freshman at college, and I've been rushing a fraternity whilst there. Before anyone gets any ideas, most fraternities in America are not what you hear about on television. While those certainly do exist, and we even have one or two of them on my campus, the majority of fraternities are filled with good and cool guys. One of the things that drove me to the fraternity is that I felt like they actually wanted me there. I loved the sense of companionship and brotherhood that the active members seemed to have for one another. So when spring hit and I was allowed to become a pledge, I did. I was really excited with this because I knew and liked all of the 14 guys who were pledging, 3 of whom were even my closest friends on campus. And I was happy that I'd get to become brothers in bond with all of them. This fraternity that I pledged with was officially a non-hazing one, although they did let us know going into it that there was going to be some light hazing, because in their eyes they thought that brought us closer together. And I wholeheartedly agreed with that. Every Thursday night, we would participate in things called rituals, which were usually quick things designed to teach us a lesson about what being in a fraternity meant. And one night, I suppose they succeeded. We went down into the basement, all 14 of us, and the activities were waiting for us. One of them stood up. Pledges, this is probably the most hazing we will ever do to you. He then proceeded to split us all into groups of 2, and they had us all remove any clothing which linked us to the college or the fraternity, as well as put on warm clothing and relinquish our telephones. We will be taking you on an adventure, and you will all work with your partner to bring us something to eat. Stick to the roads and you'll be fine, and don't come back until you find something. With that, we all had bags put on our heads. 2 active members guided us to cars, and they drove us somewhere. I was trying to mentally map where they were taking us, but they made a lot of unnecessary twists and turns in a clear attempt to confuse us. Eventually, I lost track of where we were, as they went down a pathway that I was unfamiliar with. After a little while, the car came to a stop. The actives helped me and my partner, a guy named Will, out of the car. They took the cloth bags off our head, and we were in the middle of nowhere on a country road late at night. I turned to the actives, and they had those classic shit-eating smiles on their faces. "You're going to want to walk down that way," one said, while pointing. "And remember, don't come back till you bring us something to eat. And get creative. Don't bring us grass or shit. Also, no processed foods. Raw ingredients only." With that, they got into their car and drove off. Without much wait, Will and I started walking down the road, looking for anything that could have been edible. My first instinct was dandelions, because I knew from experience that you could turn those into a soup. Unfortunately, as it was still early spring, there wasn't much in terms of plant growth around, especially dandelions. Will and I spent a lot of the first part talking and joking around with one another. There weren't any houses for a long while, so we figured we really didn't have to worry about noise. Everything started out great. We figured out early on that the guys had dropped us off would drive down the road every now and then, bathing us in the light of their high beams just to annoy us. And we would always return that kindness by raising our middle fingers. I did appreciate that they were clearly checking in on us to make sure that we were safe though. I legitimately didn't feel scared at first, as I was with Will, and the actives were still patrolling the roads to make sure we were going in the right direction. To be honest, I was just worried about finding something to eat. That's when we saw our first house with its lights still on, and I had an idea. Hey Will, why don't you just go up to one of those houses and ask them for some raw ingredient? Will shook his head. Nah way man, I'm not doing that. They might have a misunderstanding or something. I did understand what Will was saying here. We're in the middle of nowhere, and having two teenagers come up to your door in the middle of the night, asking for raw ingredients, may be misconstrued. I turned to Will and tried to persuade him on this, saying that there's nothing really growing around here, so the only thing we could probably bring back is roadkill, and I'd rather risk asking a stranger than lug the bloody, rotting corpse of an animal back for several miles. Eventually, Will seemed to agree, although he insisted of staying out of sight. I jokingly called him a coward, and we went up to the house. I rang the doorbell, and not 10 seconds later, an older man in his 50s opened the door. He was balding, a bit thin, and looked like he hadn't had a shower in days. As cliché as all of that sounds, but the thing was, this guy was looking at me very creepily. He didn't look like he was surprised or irritated to see me at all. Instead, he had this sort of almost half smile, and just stared at me straight in the eyes, never breaking eye contact. "Good evening," he said in a creepy, somewhat higher-pitched voice. "What brings you here?" I got the sense that we shouldn't have knocked on this guy's door. "I'm sorry. I think we confused your house with someone else's. Sorry to bother you." "Nonsense," the guy said. "Walking down here at night? You must have had car troubles. It's okay. You can spend the night here and I will look at your car in the morning." I continued to back up. "No, it's okay, sir. We really don't need any help." For a brief second, I saw a flash of agitation cross the man's face, before he returned to that creepy half smile of his. "Honestly, it's no trouble. Come in. I promise I won't hurt you or anything." At that point, Will stepped out from the side of the porch into view. "It's okay," he said. "We really don't need any help." The guy seemed a bit surprised that there were two of us, but not really disappointed. But I think with the increase in number, and Will's "don't mess with us" tone, the guy slithered back into his house, not saying another word. Quickening our pace, Will and I got out of there. We saw the car with our actives in it pass by twice more before we found an evergreen tree, which is good because I knew that you could make tea from its branches. Having finally found our raw ingredient, our spirits were raised, and we began to forget about that guy. That is until we saw headlights up in front of us now. So we initially assumed that it was our actives again, but it came far too soon after their last pass. So there was no way they could have come around that quickly. Additionally, the car that our actives were in had one of its headlights burnt out, and this one had both working fine. We didn't think much of it at first, as we did see the occasional person just driving down the road. What tipped us off that something weird was happening was when the car just cut across, stopping in front of us on the wrong side of the road. There was no way that the message could have been misunderstood here. The car door opened and a man stepped out. We couldn't see who, as his headlights were blinding us, but I could have sworn that I heard him laugh. With only a second's hesitation, Will and I ran off the road and into a patch of forest to our right. We tried to stick together though, but somehow we got separated. I found a bunch of boulders to hide around and waited. I could hear footsteps off in the distance. The man at the house was calling out, "I know you boys are here." I slowly peeked my head out from behind the rocks and caught the form of the same man about 30 yards away from me, waving a flashlight around and carrying what appeared to be a shotgun in his hands. I steadily controlled my breathing, being sure not to panic. I knew that the actives would see that we were not on the road eventually, and that they'd know something was up. And that's when I started scanning around for Will. I don't know how, but by some miracle, I saw the form of what could only have been Will, hiding behind some brush. I began to worry, because I could see that it didn't provide him with enough cover, and the man was slowly getting closer to him. It would only be a matter of time before he caught him, and I began to go through scenarios in my head, imagining that if he caught Will, I'd try and jump him from behind, maybe get that shotgun away from him before he could do anything, and the two of us could easily overpower him. I wanted to do that, but I knew it would never work out. By some complete accident, I moved my hand around and felt something that gave me an even better idea. I felt a rock. A good-sized heavy rock, one slightly bigger than a baseball. I picked up the thing, and with all my strength, heaved it a good way off in the distance. The rock made quite a bit of noise, clearly audible through the woods. The man laughed in a maniacal, crazy way that I'll never forget, almost like a grown man trying to imitate the high-pitched squealing laughter of young, excited kids. Once he was a good ways off, I came up from my cover and moved towards Will. I probably got about halfway to him before he saw me. I made a motion for him to follow, and did without hesitation. The guy must have thought he was chasing us deeper in, which was damn convenient, because we didn't seem to be in any danger after that. We found the guy's car on the road still, the driver's side door still open. I looked inside, but cursed when I saw that he was smart enough to take his keys. Then I looked in the back seat, and found a massive lump formed in my throat. Back there was a massive hunting knife, and a bunch of duct tape. Making sure that the guy couldn't follow us, and so that we'd have a weapon just in case he could, I grabbed the hunting knife and proceeded to slash the man's tires deeply. We made our way down the way that we were supposed to go in order to put some distance between us and the lunatic, making sure to stay off the road. Eventually, we saw the distant single headlight of our active's car. We ran out into the middle of the road, frantically waving our arms like madmen, not letting him pass us. He stopped and got out, clearly worried. We rushed to the car and told him to let us in and we'd explain it. He obliged and continued driving, and we explained everything. It was made all the more believable when we showed him the knife and passed by the guy's car, which was still blocking one side of the road. I'd just like to say that I don't blame the fraternity. They had no way of knowing this would happen, and even afterwards, they did not take this lightly. They admitted to the college what they did, and helped us through the process of trying to catch the man. The police eventually did. They found that he had multiple charges of kidnapping, assault, and rape on his background. We in the fraternity didn't get into too much trouble, although they did have to swear never to do the ritual again after the incident. This incident has and will make me forever more cautious around complete strangers. You don't forget about incidents like this, and I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Nightmares where the guy succeeds in catching us. I know for a fact in my mind that the creepy bastard wanted to kidnap and most likely rape us, and at worst kill us. I am so happy to be able to say that he is now rotting away in prison. My dad, and by extension our family, were tormented by ghosts and demons. First, I need to give you a little backstory. I was young at the time, and remember very little of the actual supernatural stuff. But my dad has recounted the events of it to me before. It started when my dad was trying to get his life together. My dad had done a lot of drugs in his past, and many other things. He had been around bad crowds. He had left them and wanted to be good. A good dad to his kids. He didn't quit cold turkey though, so he still drank and was usually out of the house drinking. On one occasion, he was out drinking, and he tells me that he vividly remembers seeing a black smoke come out of his can that slowly rose until it had taken a devilish form, and then it cackled and laughed and told him that he was going to die. When my father dropped the can, the apparition disappeared. He was terrified and decided to go home, thinking he was drunk. This wouldn't be the last time something like this would happen, however. Fast forward to some time later. My dad was watching over me and my brothers one night, while my mom was away running an errand. At that point, my dad drank less. He was working more, and we had a relatively okay life. My dad was making sure that me and my brothers were taking our baths before getting ready for bed. I could do this myself, so my dad focused more on my brothers. I remember watching TV when Dad came running through the living room in boxers and a white shirt and running outside. What happened was that Dad was in my brother's bedroom and had just finished drying them off when the room had started to go black. He saw smoke fill the room that eventually turned into black nothingness. He felt weird and noticed that the skin on his arms began to move. He looked at his arms, and it looked like there was something under his skin, moving and crawling in every direction. Then he heard a voice that sounded out as a whisper that told him, in a taunting and menacing voice, to scratch his arms. He then felt a force grab him from behind, making it unable for him to run. Due to him having hung out with a tough crowd, he began to cuss at it and called whatever it was a coward, eventually breaking free, and proceeded to run outside to get the neighbor to help him. Only after escaping did he realize the implications of what had happened and the fact that we were still inside. At the time my mum was back from her errand, they both went in to find us okay and the room back to normal. Over the course of the next few months, the dark smoke would continue to creep up on my dad, wherever and whenever it could. It was a stressful time for us. I only witnessed the odd side effects of what my dad was going through, but it all stopped when we looked for help. My dad has more things that he experienced as a kid, and there's a bit more in the story than that. But that's the main thing that I will always remember. When I was in 6th grade, we had a split grade 6 and 7 class at my middle school. One of the grade 7 students, a tall red-haired girl, was quite physically mature for her age. She was constantly harassed by other guys in the class, to the point of having her handbag stolen in the schoolyard so people could see her running in a short pink skirt. But we were all the same age at least. On the other hand, early on in the school year, our big hulking gym teacher, probably of Greek or Balkan origin, started acting funny around the redhead. He would always conveniently call on her for demonstrations and physically help her with the techniques. This happened with no other student. Nothing untowards at all. And it happened in front of the whole class. But it was odd. If he needed a guy, unfortunately it was me. And one other guy. This went on all year, until around March, when he burst in on us boys in the changing room. We all looked pissed, but there was nothing we could do. He had some BS pretext, saying someone took something, and he'd find the thief if I recall correctly. After he leaves, we all start singing. Mr. K is a perv. Mr. K is a perv. Students could probably hear it all the way from the cafeteria, which was right behind. The gym teacher, who could certainly hear it from his office, storms back in. Stop that right now or I'm getting the principal. We actually stop more or less, except for a few mutters. But a few minutes later the principal walks in, stares at each and every one of us and starts shouting at us, asking who the thief was, saying that that person will be expelled and the people all protecting him are in very serious danger. Not to mention those spreading rumours about Mr. K will be going to the principal's office. So we explained that it was Mr. K who decided to enter the male changing room, but we all thought he was creepy, especially those of us who had the hots for the redhead. Maybe we were just being paranoid. But 2 days later, I get pulled aside, literally, I think from indoor soccer, and was told to find the redhead, and to tell her to come to his office. That was odd, I think to myself. She's like 50 feet away playing on the girls' side of the gym. Go find her yourself. Like I said, this guy was creepy as hell. But nevertheless, I can't do anything. So I go tell her that he wants to see her in his office. She looks as scared as I was, and I go back to playing soccer and forget the incident. Apparently, he had asked her if she wanted anything from the teacher's lounge. No, she said. He leaves, saying he's just getting a coffee for himself and a couple of donuts in case she changes her mind. When he comes back, He tells her he's been noticing her squats were poor and asks her to practice right there with him. Their conversation goes like this. My team needs me, we're down a person. Forget about them, we're talking about you. Here, try it, let me show you. The girl goes, but the teacher just says do it. The creepy gym teacher then proceeds to walk behind and grab her waist, looking down her blouse from behind him. Am I making you uncomfortable? She bolts out and leaves the office in a rush, tears streaming down her eyes. She goes to the changing room early that day, and since PE is the last course of the day, we don't see her until the following morning. The next day, while he's in his office, he was usually in his office doing nothing and not supervising, and while we were supposed to be doing a few laps around the gym, she jogs up to me and a few other male students. She tells us everything. That afternoon, another class of boys' changing rooms starts screaming at the top of their lungs that he is a perv. Somehow the administrators didn't hear us, and the next 2 years I was there, as far as anyone I know, nobody reported the guy. It must have been a shock to hear the kids. As far as I know, no one ever reported this guy. It must have shocked him to hear the kids, this young, be cursing him. At any rate, he wasn't fired during my tenure. What happened to the girl? Thankfully, he no longer called on her to demonstrate techniques for the rest of the year. He probably got the message through the walls of the boys' changing room. Her final year there, she had a different PE teacher, and I sadly lost contact with her after middle school. Thankfully, she did the smart thing and got out of that man's office before things really got out of hand. I'm worried that something worse could have happened, because he seriously had a few screws loose and had a thing for little girls. I'm going to start by saying that this story is going to make my friend and I sound like complete morons. And this is because we are. We completely ignored everything we'd been told about stranger danger and basic safety. Because hey, we're both 20-year-old college dudes. My parents are pretty well off and love to travel to exotic destinations. They planned a trip to St. Lucia and extended an invitation to my sister, her boyfriend, and my friend Vince and I. St. Lucia is a small mountainous jungle island near the coast of Venezuela. It's significantly underdeveloped as a nation, with an all-cash economy, where very few taxes are collected and spent for the good of the commons. Violent crime on the island is not unheard of. There are a few paved roads and a few major favela towns and a couple of small secluded high-end boat-accessible resorts. We stayed at one of these resorts. My parents were in one room and the rest of us stayed in a room next door. The rooms were more like little huts, open entirely to the outdoors, with easily accessible rooftops above and below. All was well for most of the trip. We went hiking, snorkeling, and relaxed on the beach. As much as my friend and I enjoyed it, this resort was meant for honeymooners, not college kids looking to have a wild time. One night, Vince and I were up drinking late at the bar, which was not extremely lively as usual, and we get talking to the bartender, Gustavo. We bond with Gustavo over our interest in Yeezys, Wheezies and girls, and nothing at all seemed off. We asked him if he knew any clubs or anywhere we could go to have a good time in town. He told us about how we had to leave the resort to really experience St. Lucia, as we expected. He offered to take us to his place sometime, to show us the good time that we had been looking for. Then he showed us a picture of his house. This should have been the first red flag, but we were drinking and had no reason not to trust our new friend. Gustavo had a massive house for St. Lucian standards, complete with a huge flat-screen TV, pool table, bar, and Camaro. We'd been around the island a bit at this point, and had not seen a house or car half as nice as his. We told him we'd be interested, but would have to let him know we would go later. The next day, we get a text from Gustavo, midday, saying that the boat was at the dock to pick us up. This was strange to Vince and I, since we hadn't agreed upon a time. We told him that we had plans and couldn't go during the day, and that seemed to piss him off a bit. The next day, whenever Vincent and I would see Gustavo at the resort, he lacked enthusiasm and ignored us when we said hello. The following day, however, Gustavo was off work and texting us as if we were best friends again. He asked us if we would come over to his place and told us he was making pizza and had girls lined up for some of that good. Knowing that my parents would never let me do something so risky, we told him that we could only go after 10, because my parents would most likely be asleep at that point. He agreed, but was kind of annoyed and made it sound like we owed him and better not bail again. On a side note, I'd never done coke, but my friend Vincent had. I was slightly worried, but I figured I'd just say no, like DARE taught me, or whatever, and still have a good time. Besides, we couldn't bail twice. As 10 o'clock rolled around, my parents had gone to sleep. My sister and her boyfriend had gone elsewhere, and Vincent and I were finishing up pre-gaming at the beach bar near the dock until it closed for the night. It started getting very dark, and soon Vincent and I were about the only ones there. This is when things get really sketchy. Around 10:45, we get a call from Gustavo saying something along the lines of, "The plans have changed. The boat taxi is no longer being arranged through the resort. My guy is coming to pick you up. The fare is going to be more expensive now, around $100 plus tip. He's nice, but he has a temper, and he's in a hurry, so don't piss him off. Look for the green and yellow boat and just get in." The unfamiliar flat and low tone of the voice that he used sent chills down my spine, and suddenly I knew that we were both in serious trouble. We only had $140 on us together, and immediately agreed that we would wait for the boat, give him the cash, and say we wouldn't go anymore. A few minutes later, we got another call saying, "My guy is going to be a little late. He had some drop-offs to make, but if you're not at the dock when he gets there, he'll be knocking on room 17. Don't make him knock." Room 17 is the room my parents are staying in. Vincent is about to throw up at this point, trying to stay calm. I suggest we hide our phones and wallets nearby, just in case they try to mug us. There is nobody but us at the beach at this point, and I could barely make out some small boats far out in the bay, but they hadn't moved in a long while. We are standing on a small rock peninsula at the side of a cliff surrounded by black water, with a single dim lamp overhead. We cannot run, we cannot hide, and my parents and sister and her boyfriend may be in serious danger if we decide to do so. At 11:30, I get another call from Gustavo. "There'll be 3 boats coming. Just get in." This is now obviously screwed. We're screwed. We are so screwed. Why the hell are there 3 boats? Vincent and I are both pretty skinny guys, and there's no way we could fight more than 1 person. It's the perfect kidnapping, I thought to myself. Vince and I are weak young adults who come from apparent well-off families, who didn't tell anyone where they were going or what they were getting themselves into. Gustavo knew all of these things, and obviously had the resources and connections to pull off abductions, or worse. I spot what appeared to be a security guard making rounds around the beach, and immediately walk as fast as I can to him with Vincent. I explained, without using Gustavo's name, that we are supposed to be picked up by 3 boats, and we feel extremely uncomfortable after recent events, and just want to pay the boat captain and leave. My hope was that if we did get kidnapped, at least 1 person would know where the hell we went, or what happened to us. He assured us that no boats came around this time of night, and that we shouldn't wait much longer. We walk not 100 feet before we get the single most chilling text I've ever read. "Did you just talk to security?" Vince and I both froze, just staring at each other for a few seconds. We decided to reply, and said we were just chatting with him, and we're heading back, and that we can't go anymore because it's too late. He quickly replied, "Don't worry, haha." We replied, "Seriously, don't send those boats, we're not going anymore." Once again, his response was, "Don't worry, haha," followed by another, "Don't worry, haha," and that was the last we heard from him. I've seen the movies. Coke dealers don't usually treat rats very nicely. Maybe Gustavo knew that I didn't use his name, and maybe that's why we were able to get out of this mess. Was the security guard in on it? Or were we being watched the whole time? I will never know. Not knowing what to do, Vincent and I stayed climbing the few hundred stairs up to the mountain, back to our room with purpose. Vincent and I started climbing the few hundred stairs up the mountain, back to our room with purpose. It was dark now, with only the occasional dim lamp along the way. Every single sound, every single movement in the surrounding jungle scared the living shit out of us. I've never felt this afraid in my entire life. We get back to the room, lock the door, and I go out to the patio to silently watch the easily climbable roofs like a hawk. Vincent swears that he saw hands on the edge of the roof, but they were gone when I pointed my phone's flashlight at them. For the next 2 hours I sat there, head on a swivel, ready to scream and wake up my family and fight for my life. While freaking the hell out, I saw a meteor burn up in the clear night sky, which was easily the highlight of my night. So that was pretty cool, I guess. Eventually we figured it was over, and we went to bed. Relieved to wake up in the morning without my throat slit, I relaxed a bit. Luckily, we were checking out of the hotel at 11, so we wouldn't have to run into Gustavo again. Before leaving the resort, Vincent and I wandered down to the beach to kill some time. That's when 2 large native men that appeared not to be working at the resort approached us. The larger one said, "Hey, are you the guys that were supposed to be on the boat last night? You know, Gustavo?" I replied, "No," trying my best to sound confused. "How much longer are you guys staying?" he asked. "We're leaving in an hour," I replied. He looked at me with a "I know you're lying to me" face, held out his fist, grinned, and with a low voice said, "Safe trip home." I bumped his fist and walked away, trying to stay cool. I felt like everyone who worked at the resort was looking at us and whispered about us for the next hour. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't feel safe until we made the hour drive to the airport, and got through security. I sincerely hope I never bump into you or your friends again, Gustavo. A few years ago, I was working as a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club and was idly sitting at the end of the bar one night when a couple came in. Obviously that's not unusual. I had no contact with them and thought nothing of them being there until later. A few days after that night, the doorman handed me a piece of paper that had two names on the phone written on it: Laura and Richard. I was supposed to call one of them, so I called Laura, who told me they'd been the couple who'd been there at the bar the other night. They'd noticed me and thought I'd be perfect in a part that Richard would be producing in a film. Would I be up for a meeting? Of course I would. Who wouldn't? I was told Richard would pick me up next night at 7 and to wear something wild. 7 o'clock came around the next evening, and I was ready in a white dress of lace with ostrich feather trim when Richard showed up outside my building. So I went down, introduced myself and got into the car. We agreed to go to a local bar I knew well for the meeting, but first we had to go back to his place so he could pick up some contracts he'd forgotten. So off we went. He went into the house and came back with a few manila envelopes and an open bottle of beer, a brand that I didn't drink, plus it's against the law to drink alcohol in a vehicle here. So I stuck the beer into the window well of his Jeep and we went into the bar. At the bar he showed me what were supposedly scripts from this movie he was producing and some contracts. It all looked pretty legit. Richard was very nice and I was interested. I made some plans to go out later with my soon-to-be boyfriend, so I excused myself to go call him on the bar's payphone and took my Corona that I ordered at the bar with me to the bank of phones. As a dancer, I'd been taught by the other older girls to never let your drinks out of your sight. My boyfriend wanted to go to another club, so I went back to the table where Richard was and let him know that I had to go. He didn't like that, and he tried a few different things to get me to go with him to the movie set with him, saying I could meet Mickey Rookie and check the set out. But all I wanted to do was meet my boyfriend, so I declined, took Richard's card, and left. I never heard from Richard again, but a couple of months later, the police came around to the bar I was working at. They had 2 big books of mugshots and a stack of Polaroids with them, and they wanted to talk with all of us about a predator couple who had been setting up meetings with dancers by saying they were in the film industry, then drugging and raping them. They showed me the 2 mugshot books and asked me if I saw anyone I recognized in the pictures. I immediately identified Richard and Laura. They then showed me the Polaroids, which were trophy pictures of the couple in the act of attacking the poor drugged girls, and asked me if I knew any of the victims and where they might find them. I only knew a couple of the women in the photographs, but there were a lot that this had happened to. Richard and Laura were prosecuted. He went to jail, but she didn't, because she was from a wealthy family, and she also turned witness on him. About 12 years after Richard was convicted, I saw in the newspaper that he was up for the possibility of parole. So I wrote a letter to the parole board, telling this story and urging them not to let him back out, because he was a dangerous offender who should have to stay in prison for the entirety of his sentence. If I had drank that opened beer he had handed me from his Jeep on the way to the meeting, I wouldn't have made it to the meeting, and would have probably ended up in that stack of Polaroids. Girls and guys, always keep an eye on your drinks. Have fun, but be careful out there. So, this is an ongoing saga in my life. Basically, I've been living home with my parents in rural Maine for the past few months. Previously, I was a student at the University of California, Berkeley. I haven't been on any social media in the past few months, nor used my phone to call or text. My dad is a retired police officer with a background in the Marines. My mother is a school teacher at a local high school. Over the past few months, they've both taken active leave from work to try and help me deal with this. It's ruining my life. When I lived in California, my sister and I would frequent a gym close to campus. We'd usually only really go for the yoga classes, sometimes the jacuzzi. Our yoga instructor was a mid-40s, some would call him a grey fox, kind of cute guy, but older, definitely not my type. He was a good instructor, led good classes, and seemed like a normal guy. After a while, I started to notice him everywhere. On campus, on the market, pharmacy, park, beach, street, mall. He would always come up and say hello, but never acknowledges the fact that we keep bumping into each other. After a while, he tried adding me on Facebook. I let the invite sit for a while, not really thinking much about it. The day I decide, hey, maybe I'll just add him, he sends me this message. I feel this strange connection to you, Alex. It's strange. In all my years, I've been with so many women, so many girls. I should really say, just immature people who don't have the confidence to really be who they want to be. You're such a beautiful young person, with so much inner fire and charisma. I just have to get to know you better. I was freaked out, because really, we'd never talked about anything besides yoga. I blocked him, and forgot all about it. The very next day he shows up at my apartment complex with flowers and an apology note. My doorman wouldn't let him in, so he left it for me. I threw it all away, and informed the doorman that he was seriously starting to scare me. Upon leaving my first class, he called up to me on the street and needed to talk to me. I blew him off with some excuse about being late, and he didn't take it pretty well. He put his hands on my elbows and jerking me back. He tried to kiss me, but I pushed him away. His face was visibly red with anger, and I ran. He ran after me, and I got away safely into a crowd of students. I reported it to the campus police, and they informed it to the Berkeley PD. Then I filed for a restraining order. However, that did nothing. He still showed up outside my apartment on a regular basis. I would call the police, and he would be gone before they arrived. I was convinced he was using a police scanner or something, because they were never able to apprehend him. After a few months, I left that apartment. Moving under the cover of darkness, I found a spacious loft a few blocks over. It was a great move, and I didn't see him for another few days. Like clockwork, he found me, and bombarded me with showering praise when I left for work. He loved my hair, my legs, my ass, my aura. Like always, I called the cops, and he would be gone before they arrived. It was at this point that my grades were slipping. Studying became difficult because he would find me wherever I went. Library second floor in the back near the emergency exit. He found me. Boardwalk fish and chip place, fifth table from the door. He was there. My friend's dorm on campus, on the 6th floor. He'd be waiting outside the building. I was losing weight and wasn't healthy. I hardly slept and couldn't keep a meal down. Knowing that he was right outside my door, wanting to throw more Jeepers Creepers lines my way. I eventually became so sick with fear and anger that I confronted him. Big mistake. He reacted like a madman, throwing his fists in the air, crying, sobbing. His exact words to me were, "If I can't have you, Alex, no one can. You are so special to me. The way you move, the way you think, your gorgeous soul. You need to accept me into your life, baby. I have to help you." I dropped out the following semester and began working at a police station as a receptionist. Everyone there knew my situation, and for the first time in a few months, I felt safe. I had an officer drive me home every night, as we lived about 30 feet from each other. I had his pager, work phone, home phone, and Skype. If I needed anything, he would be there. And for the longest time I felt secure. Then, like all good things, it came to an end. And the stalker began to manifest himself once again, and the situation got bigger and badder. I came home from a party late one night, stripped down, had a pee, and then got in the shower. A few minutes in the bathroom, the door opened, and there, nude as the day is long, was Mr. Fox. I screamed bloody murder, and he slammed the door with a grimace of pain, and I heard him bolt. After I finished recounting my police report, I phoned my parents. I had kept them in the loop about the whole situation, and this was just the final straw for my dad. He came and got me the next day, packed what I could carry and flew me home. So I've been home since. Mr. Fox has actually been seen in our small little hometown. He knows where my parents live, because our neighbours see him skulking around when we're not home. Of course, they call the police, but he's out of there like always. My dad has entertained the idea of using me as bait, allowing him to get near and spring the trap, but I just can't do that. Over the past few weeks, he's made it evident through messages written on the walls of the garage, some in blood and some in feces, that I am dead to him. Some were written in third person as well as first, and I'm afraid I'm probably dealing with a mentally ill person who won't relent until one of us is dead. This happened 1 or 2 years ago. It was the day I never expected to come. It changed my life in so many ways that I still feel like I cannot digest it. I want to start by saying a little bit about myself, so you understand the context and why it was so weird and foreign for something like this to happen to me. I am a fairly geeky guy, and I love science fiction and video games. I worked as a design engineer in a factory and spent most of my weekends with my friends, hiking, playing board games, or watching movies. So, you realize nothing I did would attract the attention of the cartels. I do not have a lot of money. I live in a lower middle class type of life here in Mexico. But the real issue was my sister, who was in a high-ranking position in the public security area of politics. That is the reason I was targeted. It was a Tuesday early morning, and I was on my way to work, which started at 6 a.m. I remember that day. I took my dad's SUV because they were on vacation, and I was supposed to pick them up at the airport after work. I lived about a half hour away from my job, so I left at around 5:25 every morning. When I was leaving, I saw a pretty shady SUV parked about a block away from my house. And honestly, after my sister took her job, I was more aware about things I saw that were out of place. I felt a little bit paranoid because weeks before it happened and I felt like someone was following me. So yeah, I passed this SUV and saw a guy on the driver's seat with a baseball cap. I stopped for a bit, looked him straight in the eye, and he just looked down and covered his face. I honestly didn't think too much of it. My family had been telling me for weeks prior that I was just overreacting and that no one was following me. So I thought it was just some random guy waiting for someone. I took off for work, and for me to get there, I have to go through a really ugly neighborhood, which is poorly lit and has a really bad reputation. I was in a 2-lane street that's only one way. I was in the right lane at the time, and I saw a Jeep Cherokee just speed by me on the left lane, and then continue its way in front of me. When we arrived at the end of the street, I had to turn right to get to work, and the Cherokee just completely stopped on the right lane in front of me, with their blinkers signaling to the left. I found it kind of weird, but I did not want to be an asshole and honk them, and wanted to give them a little bit of time to move. While I was waiting, a freaking Explorer came screeching on the left lane, and it stopped next to me, and 4 guys came out with guns and a baseball bat. The guy with the bat smashed my window and hit me in the face, while another put a gun to my head and said, "Esto es de verdad, pendejo. Bájate del carro," which translates to, "This is real, asshole. Get out the car." So please understand that at this moment, I did not feel like they wanted to steal my car. I already knew they were trying to kidnap me. If I knew they just wanted the car, I would have given them the car. But I pieced everything together. The cars that I felt were following me at night every day, the guys just sitting on the SUV outside my place, and obviously my sister's job. I knew that if they took me, it would be torture followed by certain death. And if they really wanted to kidnap me, they would not kill me. So I stepped on the gas. I smashed between the Cherokee and the Explorer and ran over one of the guys. I sped as much as the SUV would give me and honked so I could make a lot of noise and people would notice. My hope was to get to my workplace, which had private security, and called my sister so she could mobilize the police. With all the adrenaline on me, I passed the entrance to my work and tried to turn back, but I crashed on a corner. At that moment, I honestly felt like my heart would come out of my mouth. Everything moved so slowly, so I tried to calm myself down. I breathed. I saw through my mirrors if they were still following me, and I saw no one. An empty street that was already lit by the morning dusk, and the SUV was still working. I turned around, got to my work, and yelled at the security guard to open the doors. I parked at the entrance, got out of the car and called my sister. After that, I went inside and spoke to my boss about what happened, and went to the restroom to clean the glass and blood off my hair and face. When I came outside the restroom and out the parking lot, there were around 10 cop cars outside my workplace. My sister had already told me to speak with a specific police officer and confirm his name. Everything went smoothly, and I felt safe and protected. After that, I moved into my sister's house, which has police guarding it. I have bodyguards that are with me every time I go out. This has cost me my job, relationships, lifelong friendships. Everyone's afraid to hang out with you when they know you are a target for the cartels, and it's understandable. But it does not make it feel any less shitty. Investigations continued through the beginning of 2017. I later found out through security camera footage that there were 3 SUVs in total, with about 12 people trying to kidnap me. I found out that the cartel that was after me was one of the most powerful in the world, and that the person who was in charge of investigating my case was killed. So right now, I'm working for the Mexican government. It's a low-profile job which does not pay much and does not attract too much attention. I've looked for ways to leave the country, but I do not have enough money nor qualifications, as I'm a college dropout, and I'm still living with my sister, with people protecting me and my family 24 hours a day. And the guys who tried to kidnap me are still at large. I'm trying to make the best of the situation. I lost a lot of weight and spend a lot more time with my nephews, and recently got into a steady relationship. But honestly, I'm always on edge and feel like I'm in imminent danger. I am not religious. I was raised Catholic, but fell away in my teenage years, as so many do, and I personally haven't looked back. I am also a 4th-year medical student, going into psychiatry. Science is my life. I am one of those people who believe that there is a scientific reason behind everything. Mediums use cold reading and distractions. Psychics use sleight of hand and get information ahead of time. And there are no such thing as miracles. I had a patient today in a family medical practice who came in to talk about management of his chronic conditions. Long story short, he ended up telling me that he has had special powers that have been passed down in his family from God, that allowed him to rid the world of demons. Okay, great, a psych case, right? I've had patients tell me that the government put cameras in their walls and that they were Jesus and could tell their followers apart by shaping in their eyes. This is nothing I'm not used to. He told me very detailed descriptions of angels that traveled with him in their history. He talked about how what he did, traveling and performing exorcisms, was killing him, but he owed it to humanity to continue, and to help his teenage son develop his full powers before he was gone. He then started talking about me. He said that he could tell that I was a healer, that I couldn't stand to see others in pain, that I would go on to heal people's minds. He told me that he wanted to give me my own personal angel, since there was so much evil in the world, and the good needs protecting. He started praying, and commanded an angel to come down and protect me. He then commanded that the angel also protect her husband across the country, and guide him in his studies, and also to protect their future children. I wasn't even supposed to see this patient. I had some free time and popped in to help out my preceptor. The only thing this patient knew about me was my first name. He had no way of knowing that my husband and I have been long distance across the country for 4 years, while he finishes his PhD. Or that I'm even married in the first place, as I forgot to wear my wedding ring on that day. Or that we don't have children yet. He told me that there was someone there with us, and if he could tell me about her. He said that my deceased godmother was there, and that she could see me. He said that she just kept saying, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness," over and over again, and that she wanted me to know how proud she was of me, and how mature and professional I looked in my white coat. He said, "She never got to see you in your coat before she died. She can't get over how great you look. That she knew you would do great things." My grandmother died 2 years ago. She had never seen me in my white coat before death. In moments when she was happy or surprised, she was known to repeat "oh my goodness" over and over. The patient did not know that she was dead. He did not know anything about me. He told me that tonight I would see my angel in my bedroom, that the angel would pass by me, and I would catch a glimpse of it, and that would be my sign that I was protected. He told me not to be scared. I was finally able to successfully transition the visit back to his medical care. But before he left, he told me that he could see a goodness in me, that I just had to keep going. I called my husband and told him everything after work, and he was pretty freaked out as well. We kept trying to think of ways that this guy would have known things. This wasn't cold reading, and if it were guessing, he was pretty freaking good at it. For no reason. Who would guess that someone not only has a husband, but that he lives across the country? None of the staff there knew my personal life. I haven't talked about my husband to anyone. No one knows about my grandmother. There's no way he could have known. I gave him no feedback or confirmation while he was speaking, other than the usual, "Okay, I understand," and trying to divert him back to talking about his medical care. Tonight, I was in my room listening to music, when I turned around and suddenly saw something, a foot or some sort of shape, like there were a person turning and walking out of my bedroom. I live alone. I jumped and yelped a little bit because I was freaked out. I immediately called my husband, who answered the phone with, "Did you see the angel?" I admit, as he does as well, that at this point I'm probably conditioned to see something with how freaked out I was today. But still, as my husband says, "Well dear, I guess there's just going to be things we'll never know. Worst case scenario, we're right, and we're not protected by an angel. Best case scenario, everything we know is wrong, and we're protected for life. Nothing bad. I don't believe in demons or people who can speak to the dead. I don't believe in God, Jesus, or angels. But I have no explanation for what happened today, and that bothers me. I left a lot of this out because it was a long visit, and so much more was said. But just be aware that I am as skeptical and science-minded as they come. So is my husband, and I don't know what to think right now." Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's edition of Scary Stories in the Rain. Please don't forget that I do have a live stream coming up on Tuesday, And if there's anything that you would like to ask me or suggest for it, feel free to post it in the community tab so that I can be sure to get to it during the stream. I also want to let you know that a close family friend is going to be 18 tomorrow. She has a YouTube channel and focuses mainly on original songs and covers, and it would mean a lot to me if you guys wouldn't mind hopping over to her channel, checking out a little bit of her music, and most of all, wishing her a very happy 18th birthday. I think it will be something really nice and special. I'll be leaving a link in the description and on screen. Thanks guys. But for now I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.